At my age, I thought I had already experienced every form of disrespect a person could endure. I was wrong. He stood at the head of the table in that overpriced restaurant, champagne glass raised, his $1,000 suit gleaming under the chandelier lights. My future son-in-law's father, Richard Thornton, looked directly at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said, "Let's be honest here. Some of us built empires." He gestured toward himself and his wife. "And some of us, well, some of us spent our lives emptying bedpans." The laughter that followed still echoes in my ears. 23 people at that rehearsal dinner, and at least half of them laughed. My own daughter, my Melissa, looked down at her plate and said nothing. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply took a sip of my water and waited, because Richard Thornton had no idea who I really was, and by the end of that weekend, he would understand exactly what he had done. My name is Rose. I'm 64 years old, and for 41 years, I worked as a nurse at Memorial Hospital in Cleveland, Ohio. I started when I was 23, fresh out of nursing school, full of hope and idealism. I retired 2 years ago, with nothing but a modest pension, a small house that's been paid off for a decade, and the satisfaction of knowing I helped thousands of people during the worst moments of their lives. I raised Melissa alone, after her father died in a car accident when she was 7. I worked double shifts. I picked up extra hours. I made sure she had everything she needed for school, for sports, for college. I wasn't rich, but we were never hungry, and she always knew she was loved. Melissa met Daniel Thornton during her junior year at Ohio State. He was handsome, ambitious, studying business. His family owned a chain of furniture stores across the Midwest. By the time they graduated, Daniel was being groomed to take over the family business, and Melissa was head over heels in love. I liked Daniel at first. He seemed kind, attentive, genuinely interested in Melissa's career in marketing, but over the years, I noticed changes, small things at first. The way he would check his phone when I was talking, the way he never quite looked me in the eye, the way he introduced me to his colleagues as Melissa's mother without ever mentioning my name. And then there were his parents. Richard and Victoria Thornton lived in a 6-bedroom house in the suburbs of Columbus. They drove matching Mercedes. They vacationed in Europe twice a year. And from the very first time I met them, they made it clear that I was not their equal. Victoria would look at my clothes with barely concealed disdain. Richard would ask about my little job at the hospital with a patronizing smile. They never visited my home. When we had dinners together, it was always at their house or at expensive restaurants where they could show off their wealth. But I kept quiet. I smiled. I made small talk. Because I loved my daughter, and I wanted her to be happy. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a joyful occasion. The wedding was scheduled for the following Saturday at the Thorntons Country Club. 300 guests, a live band, a 5-tier cake, everything paid for by Richard and Victoria, as they reminded everyone constantly. "We spared no expense," Victoria said at least 4 times that evening, "only the best for our Daniel." I had offered to contribute. I had savings. Not much, but enough to cover the flowers or the photographer. Melissa had declined, gently. "Mom, the Thorntons want to handle everything. It's their gift to us." I understood. I didn't want to cause problems, so I stayed in my lane, as they say. The dinner was at an Italian restaurant that Richard had rented out entirely for the evening. The guest list included the wedding party, immediate family, and several of Richard's business associates. I was seated at the far end of the main table, next to Melissa's college roommate and her husband. The Thorntons were at the center, of course, with Daniel and Melissa on either side. Everything was going fine until the toasts began. Richard stood up first, naturally. He talked about Daniel's accomplishments, his work ethic, his bright future leading the family business. He talked about how proud he was to welcome Melissa into the Thornton family. "She's a lovely girl," he said, glancing at my daughter. "Smart, ambitious, beautiful." Daniel really found a gem. Then his expression shifted. Just slightly, just enough for me to notice. Of course, every gem needs the right setting to truly shine. He looked around the room, then his gaze landed on me. And I have to say, it's impressive how far Melissa has come, considering her modest background. A few people chuckled nervously. I felt my face grow warm. I mean, let's be honest here, Richard continued, his voice taking on that jovial tone that wealthy men use when they're about to say something cruel. Some of us built empires, and some of us spent our lives emptying bedpans. The laughter came then. Not from everyone, but enough. Richard's business partners, Victoria, covering her mouth in mock embarrassment. Even Daniel cracked a smile before catching himself. I looked at Melissa, my daughter, my baby girl, the child I had sacrificed everything for. She was staring at her plate, her cheeks flushed with shame. But not shame for what Richard had said. Shame for me. Shame that her mother was a nurse. Shame that I didn't fit into this glittering world she was marrying into. She said nothing. Richard raised his glass. To Daniel and Melissa, may they build an empire of their own. Everyone drank. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. The woman next to me, Melissa's friend, leaned over and whispered, "That was really rude. Are you okay?" I nodded and smiled. "I'm fine, dear. I've heard worse." And I had, after 4 decades in healthcare, I had been cursed at, spat on, threatened, and worse. I had held the hands of dying patients. I had delivered news that destroyed families. I had worked through a pandemic while people called us heroes one day and questioned our motives the next. A rich man's insult at a dinner party? That was nothing. But it wasn't really nothing. Not when my own daughter sat there and let it happen. Not when she chose silence over loyalty. I excused myself to use the restroom. I needed a moment to collect myself, to breathe, to decide what to do next. Because I knew something that Richard Thornton didn't know. Something that no one at that table knew, except for me. I knew who had really saved his family. It happened 19 years ago. I was working in the billing department at Memorial Hospital at the time, helping patients navigate insurance claims and financial assistance programs. It was a temporary assignment, while I recovered from a knee injury that prevented me from doing floor nursing. A man came into my office one October afternoon. He was in his 40s, well-dressed but disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes. He introduced himself as Walter Thornton. He was Richard's brother. Walter explained that his son, a boy named Marcus, had been diagnosed with leukemia. The treatment was going to be expensive. Even with insurance, the family business, Thornton Furniture, was struggling. The economy had taken a downturn, and they were barely keeping the stores open. Richard was the one running the company, but things were falling apart. "We might lose everything," Walter said, his voice breaking. "The business, our homes, everything. And without the money, my son." He couldn't finish the sentence. I spent 3 hours with Walter that day. I helped him fill out financial assistance applications. I connected him with the hospital's charity care program. I made calls to non-profit organizations that helped families with childhood cancer. By the end of the week, Marcus was approved for a grant that covered most of his treatment costs. But that wasn't all. During my research, I discovered that Thornton Furniture was on the verge of bankruptcy. They owed money to suppliers, banks, and creditors. Richard was trying to negotiate with everyone, but he was running out of time and options. I had some money saved. Not a fortune, but a decent sum. My husband's life insurance payout, which I had invested wisely and barely touched over the years. It was meant to be Melissa's college fund, her safety net, her future. I did something that some might call foolish. Others might call it generous. I called it being a nurse. Through a lawyer friend, I arranged an anonymous loan to Thornton Furniture, $50,000, with minimal interest, to be repaid over 10 years. The terms were generous, almost charitable. I didn't want recognition. I didn't want gratitude. I just wanted to help a family in crisis. And I never told anyone. Not Melissa, not my friends, not even my sister. I kept copies of all the documents in a folder in my closet, but I never looked at them again. I just moved on with my life. Thornton Furniture recovered. The economy improved. Richard expanded the business, opened new stores, became wealthy beyond anything Walter or their parents had ever imagined. Marcus beat cancer and grew up to become a doctor. Walter and his family faded into the background as Richard took all the credit for saving the company. And me? I went back to nursing. I continued my quiet life. I watched my daughter graduate from college, start her career, fall in love with a man whose family fortune was built on the foundation I had helped lay. The irony was not lost on me. But I kept my secret. For 19 years. Until that rehearsal dinner. I returned from the restroom, with my decision made. I would not cause a scene. I would not embarrass my daughter on her special weekend. I would smile, finish the dinner, and then quietly distance myself from the Thornton family after the wedding. But fate had other plans. As I approached the table, I overheard Richard talking to one of his business associates. "The thing about people like that," he was saying, gesturing vaguely in my direction, "is they don't understand value. They work their whole lives for pennies while we build legacies. It's almost sad, really." His associate nodded sympathetically. "At least Melissa turned out well." "Nature versus nurture," Richard replied with a laugh. "Daniel will fix whatever damage was done." I stopped walking. My heart pounded in my chest. Something inside me, something that had been dormant for decades, suddenly woke up. I thought about all the nights I had worked double shifts to pay for Melissa's dance lessons. The weekends I spent driving her to soccer games instead of resting my aching feet. The sacrifices I made so she could go to college, join a sorority, meet people like Daniel Thornton. And this man, this pompous, arrogant man, was dismissing my entire life as worthless. I made a new decision. I walked back to my seat and waited for the dinner to end. I smiled politely when Victoria complimented the dessert. I nodded when Daniel talked about their honeymoon plans. I hugged Melissa goodnight and told her I loved her. Then I went back to my hotel room and started making phone calls. The next morning, I drove back to Cleveland. I told Melissa I had a minor emergency at home, nothing serious, but I needed to take care of it before the wedding. She seemed relieved. Honestly, one less thing to worry about. I went to my closet and pulled out the folder I hadn't touched in 19 years. Everything was still there. The loan agreement, the bank records, the thank you letter from Walter Thornton, addressed to our anonymous benefactor, expressing his family's eternal gratitude. I made copies. Then I made more phone calls. By Friday afternoon, I had assembled a small file of documents and a clear plan. I drove back to Columbus, checked into my hotel, and waited for the wedding. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for an outdoor ceremony at the country club. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one, with the pearl buttons that I had bought specifically for this occasion. I did my hair and makeup carefully. I wanted to look my best. The ceremony was beautiful. Melissa looked radiant in her white gown. Daniel seemed nervous but happy. They exchanged vows under an arbor of white roses while 300 guests looked on. Victoria cried delicately into a handkerchief. Richard stood with his chest puffed out, the proud patriarch. I sat in the second row, where the mother of the bride is supposed to sit, and I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because I had forgiven Richard, but because I knew what was coming. The reception was held in the country club's grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, white linen tablecloths, a 12-piece orchestra. The Thorntons had indeed spared no expense. I was seated at a table with some of Melissa's aunts and uncles from her father's side, people I rarely saw anymore, but who had always been kind to me. We made small talk about the weather, the food, how beautiful Melissa looked. Then came the toasts. Daniel's best man went first, telling funny stories about college. Melissa's maid of honor followed, getting teary-eyed about their friendship. Then it was Richard's turn. He approached the microphone with the confidence of a man who has never been challenged. He talked about the Thornton legacy, the importance of family, the bright future ahead for Daniel and Melissa. "My son is marrying into a wonderful family," he said, with only a slight hesitation before the word wonderful. A few of his friends smirked. "And I want to welcome Melissa officially into the Thornton clan. She's already proven herself to be a valuable addition." He raised his glass. Everyone drank. Then the MC looked at me. And now, a few words from the mother of the bride. I hadn't planned to give a toast. Melissa had suggested I not speak, citing my discomfort with public speaking. But I had informed the MC yesterday that I had changed my mind. I stood up. The room fell silent. I walked slowly to the microphone, my heels clicking on the marble floor. 300 pairs of eyes followed me. Richard's smile faltered. Just slightly. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "I promise to keep this brief." I looked out at the crowd, then at Melissa, then at Daniel, then finally at Richard. "I've been a nurse for 41 years, I began. "Some people think that's not much. Just emptying bedpans, as someone recently put it." A few gasps. A nervous cough, from Victoria. Melissa's face went pale. "But here's what I've learned in 4 decades of nursing. You see people at their worst, at their most vulnerable. You see who they really are when the masks come off." I paused, letting the silence build. 19 years ago, a man came into my office at Memorial Hospital in Cleveland. His name was Walter Thornton. His son had just been diagnosed with leukemia, and his family was on the verge of losing everything. Their business was failing. They were about to declare bankruptcy. And without money, his son wouldn't get the treatment he needed. Richard's face had gone from red to white. He started to stand, but Victoria grabbed his arm. "I helped that family," I continued. "Through the hospital's charity programs, through nonprofit organizations, and through an anonymous loan of $50,000 from my own savings. Money I had been saving for my daughter's future." The room was completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Thornton Furniture didn't collapse 19 years ago because of that loan. Marcus Thornton, Walter's son, survived leukemia because we got him the treatment he needed. And the Thornton family went on to become wealthy and successful. I looked directly at Richard. His mouth was open, but no words came out. "I never told anyone. I never wanted credit. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because that's what nurses do. We help people even when no one is watching, even when we never get thanked." I reached into my small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the original loan agreement, signed by Walter Thornton as a representative of the family business. And this," I pulled out another paper, "is the letter of gratitude he wrote to his anonymous benefactor. He never knew it was me." I set the papers on the nearest table. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came here to celebrate my daughter's wedding, but when you publicly mock someone's life work, when you call their decades of service emptying bedpans, you should probably make sure you know who you're talking to first." I turned back to the crowd, to Daniel and Melissa. "May you build a marriage based on respect, on kindness, and on the understanding that a person's worth is not measured by their bank account." I raised my water glass. After a moment of stunned silence, others began to raise their glasses too. The orchestra conductor, looking bewildered, signaled the band to play something. I walked back to my seat. I didn't look at Richard. I didn't need to. The reception continued, but the atmosphere had changed. People were whispering. Richard and Victoria huddled in a corner, having what appeared to be an intense conversation. Walter, who I had spotted earlier but not approached, made his way through the crowd toward me. "It was you," he said, his eyes filled with tears. "All this time, it was you," I nodded. "How is Marcus?" "He's a pediatric oncologist now. He saves children's lives every day." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. That's all the thanks I ever needed. Walter hugged me. It was the first genuine human connection I had felt all weekend. Later that evening, as the reception wound down, Melissa found me by the coat check. "Mom." Her voice was small, like when she was a little girl who had done something wrong. "I didn't know about any of it." "I know you didn't. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised alone, sacrificed everything for, loved with every fiber of my being. "Because kindness isn't supposed to be transactional," I said. "You don't do good things so people will respect you. You do them because they're right. And the people who matter will see your worth without needing proof." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "I should have defended you. At the dinner. I should have said something." "Yes, you should have." I didn't sugarcoat it. She needed to hear it. I was so worried about fitting in with them, about not embarrassing Daniel. I forgot who I was, who you raised me to be. "We all lose our way sometimes," I said. "The question is whether we find it again." She hugged me then, tighter than she had in years. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know, sweetheart, I know." The next morning, my phone started ringing early. Melissa called to tell me that Richard wanted to apologize. Victoria wanted to have brunch and clear the air. Daniel was mortified by his father's behavior and wanted me to know he had never felt that way about me. And then there was Walter, who had apparently spent the night telling his brother exactly how much my help had meant to his family, how Marcus was alive because of the treatment I had helped secure, how the business had survived because of my anonymous loan, how the entire Thornton fortune was built on a foundation of kindness from a nurse they had never thanked. By the time I finished breakfast, I had 47 missed calls and over 60 text messages. I didn't respond to any of them right away. I had my coffee. I read the newspaper. I took a long shower. Then, around noon, I called Melissa. "I'll have brunch with them," I said. "But there are going to be some ground rules." The brunch was at the Thorntons' home, which I had never been invited to before. Victoria had prepared an elaborate spread, or rather, had it prepared by her catering team. Richard sat at the head of the table, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. "Rose," he began, "I want to apologize. What I said at the rehearsal dinner was unforgivable." "You're right," I said. "It was unforgivable. But that's not why you're apologizing, is it?" He looked confused. "You're not sorry because you were cruel to me. You're sorry because you found out I helped your family. If I hadn't revealed that last night, would you be apologizing today?" Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. At least he had the decency not to lie. "The problem with people like you," I continued, "is that you only value others when you find out what they can do for you. You would have treated me like dirt for the rest of your life if I had just been a nurse. No secret. No anonymous loan. Just a woman who spent 40 years caring for sick people." Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I didn't expose you last night because I wanted credit," I said. "I did it because you needed to understand something. Every person you meet, every waiter, every janitor, every nurse emptying bedpans has a story you know nothing about. They might have helped you in ways you'll never discover. Or they might not have. It shouldn't matter." I stood up. "You don't owe me anything, Richard. Not gratitude, not apologies, not brunches at your beautiful home. What you owe is to every person you've looked down on your entire life. Every person you decided was beneath you because of their job or their bank account." I picked up my purse. "Melissa, I love you. Daniel, take care of my daughter. Walter, give Marcus my best. And Richard, Victoria. I hope someday you understand that respect isn't something people have to earn from you. It's something everyone deserves simply for being human." I walked out of that house, and I never went back. The aftermath was interesting, to say the least. The story spread through the wedding guests like wildfire. Richard's business associates started looking at him differently. Some of them had heard his comments at the rehearsal dinner and were now reconsidering their partnerships. Others simply enjoyed the scandal. Melissa called me every week after that, sometimes twice a week. We talked more in the months following the wedding than we had in years. She started volunteering at a local hospital, spending time with patients, learning what her mother's world had actually been like. Daniel turned out to be a better man than his father. He apologized to me privately, without prompting, and he meant it. He and Melissa are expecting their first child now, a girl. They've asked me to be in the delivery room. Richard and Victoria maintain a polite distance. We see each other at family gatherings, exchange pleasantries, but nothing more. I caught Richard being unusually kind to a waiter at a restaurant last Thanksgiving. Progress, perhaps. And me? I'm still the same person I've always been. A retired nurse with a modest pension and a paid-off house. I still volunteer at the hospital sometimes, helping patients navigate the same confusing system I spent decades learning. I still believe that kindness matters more than wealth. Someone asked me recently if I regretted what I did at the wedding, if I wished I had just stayed quiet and kept the peace. I thought about it for a moment. Then I smiled. "Quiet people aren't powerless," I said. "We just choose our moments carefully." And that moment, at my daughter's wedding, surrounded by people who had dismissed my entire life's work as worthless, was exactly the right moment to finally speak up. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's simply telling the truth and watching the people who underestimated you realize exactly how wrong they were. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you've ever been underestimated, if someone has ever made you feel small because of your job or your bank account or your background, remember this: your worth is not determined by people who don't know your story. Keep doing good, keep being kind, and when the time is right, don't be afraid to let the truth speak for itself. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and sweet, sweet revenge. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.